Growing up, I knew I was different from other kids my age. A lot of my friends had loving homes, and I often found myself shocked at how they interacted with their families whenever I would visit. They spoke freely with their parents while I walked on eggshells around my own. I have very few memories of my childhood, and to this day I still cannot decipher how much of it is real. This lack of certainty is a common experience for people with dissociative identity disorder, or DID. When I was 17, things started clicking into place for me about my experiences, and I began seeing a mental health professional who told me my symptoms indicated that I may have a dissociative disorder. The news came at a time when misinformation ran rampant on sites such as TikTok, and when I tried to tell my father, he initially seemed receptive around my therapist, but when we got into the car, he told me he thought I had just seen it online and wanted to seem trendy. We haven't spoken much about it since. It's understandable that a parent would come up with any possible excuse for why their child couldn't possibly have DID. After all, it brings to mind the uncomfortable thought that they have somehow failed as a parent. It forces parents to re examine how they treated their child growing up. Abuse doesn't always have malice behind it, and sometimes it happens because the parent didn't realize in time that the way they were raised was also abusive, and thus they continue the cycle. The intent behind it is irrelevant, however, because it is still abuse. It is perhaps easier to reconcile with the fact that abuse did occur than it is to reconcile with the consequences. To parents, the knowledge that their child developed DID as a result of their parenting can seem like the worst possible thing. The majority of DID representation in the media is negative and casts systems as villains, often portraying them as having an evil alter, or many. This is not actually the case with real DID patients, however, and really illustrates how important it is to curb misinformation. Dissociative identity disorder is defined by the DSM-5 as a dissociative disorder characterized by the presence of at least two distinct and separate personalities within an individual. It is most often caused by severe childhood trauma and results in symptoms such as an inability to recall large chunks of childhood, frequent memory loss, also known as lost time, mood swings, detachment from the self, flashbacks, and even changes in handwriting. DID is typically covert in adolescence as it is created to protect the mind in an unsafe and volatile environment. When the patient is in a safer space, symptoms often appear to get worse. This doesn't mean they actually do get worse, though, just that they are more noticeable. Dissociative identity disorder can improve with time and therapeutic techniques, though it never fully goes away. A patient with DID may experience fusion, which is when personality states fully integrate, leaving the patient feeling as one individual rather than many. However, the brain already hardwired itself to dissociate as a coping mechanism, and if the patient is under sufficient stress in the future, it can cause another split, resulting in new alters or old ones coming out of the woodworks. Integration is the step before that, where alters begin to be able to work more in sync with each other, but while still retaining their individuality. Some patients desire final fusion, while others, such as myself, seek functional or healthy multiplicity. Pluralpedia defines healthy multiplicity as multiplicity that is not inherently disordered. The diagnostic criteria for DID includes the patient experiencing some amount of distress caused by their symptoms, so by everyone in a system working together and causing less interruption, a system may cease to be considered disordered, otherwise known as achieving functional multiplicity. It is important to note that dissociative disorders are a point of contention within the mental health field, with some professionals not believing in their existence, and those who believe in them argue about the best course of treatment. When seeking therapy, a patient has to go through a detailed process of vetting their therapist for safety purposes in order to avoid ones that cause active detriment to their health. It is also very difficult to get a DID diagnosis, with patients spending an average of 6 years before correctly getting diagnosed, according to David Spiegel. I was lucky to have a therapist who recognized my symptoms for what they were so quickly, though it wasn't without extensive research of my own, because so many others are not that fortunate to have a therapist who believes them. A major reason many systems have been accused of faking in recent years has been the rise of TikTok. In 2020 and 2021, there was a surge of DID-related videos uploaded to the social networking app, some of which seemed a bit more off-color than others. A lot of the content was sensationalized for views, which swayed the public opinion to be a bit more skeptical of DID and other disorders which got popularized on TikTok around the same time, such as Tourette's syndrome. Additionally, the TikTokers who got exposed for faking disorders, such as Tics and Roses faking Tourette's, spread a significant amount of misinformation, whether that was from malintent or a lack of proper education on the subject. People started using these videos to self-diagnose without putting in the proper research, which resulted in a pushback against people who pursued a diagnosis from a mental health professional, because people thought that they were just trying to be trendy. A former close friend of mine suspected that they might have a dissociative disorder, but got accused of faking it by our peers when we were around 16 or 17, and subsequently, he was ostracized from the friend group after relentless bullying. As a result, I never brought up my own experiences for fear of them making my life a living hell too. Not only did it harm the general public's opinion of people who have these disorders, but it also harmed the perception in the medical field. More therapists became increasingly skeptical of patients claiming to experience symptoms of DID, even more than was already the case. Many healthcare providers are hesitant when a patient comes in with a suspicion of what they may be dealing with if it isn't something simple like the common cold or COVID-19, and this only gets worse when the patient is part of a marginalized group, such as being a person of color. It is no different in the mental health field. There is an old adage that goes, when you hear hoofbeats, look for horses, not zebras, which means to expect a more common ailment than an uncommon one. While this can hold true in some cases, it is also exceedingly important for mental health professionals to listen to what their patients have to say with an open mind, because odds are the patient knows their own mind better than an outsider. It is quite poor practice to dismiss a patient out of hand simply because a professional doesn't want to consider the zebra. Particularly when DID patients are women or people of color, they get written off with some other diagnosis without properly screening for every possibility. Borderline personality disorder, or BPD, is one of these catch-all diagnoses. While some patients may genuinely have BPD, it is all too common of an occurrence for this to be a misdiagnosis or for their DID diagnosis to get swept under the rug and not documented. As a matter of fact, the overdiagnosis of BPD can be linked to hysteria diagnoses in history. According to Christina Van Vuren in Talkspace.com, symptoms of BPD include emotional volatility and instability, which closely mimics what doctors used to diagnose hysteria with before it was actually removed from the DSM in the 1950s. It was historically a women-only diagnosis, which holds true with BPD as women are diagnosed with it 75% more than men, according to Jacqueline Simon Gunn and Brent Potter. This high prevalence of diagnosis means that a significant number of DID cases go undiagnosed. According to Tracy Smith, DID has been recognized in 4% to 7.5% of patients in psychiatric residences and in 2 to 6% of patients in outpatient facilities, but some sources state it is diagnosed as low as 1.5% of the population. The medical field and the internet are not the only places DID gets a bad reputation. By far the most infamous piece of negative DID portrayal is M. Night Shyamalan's 2016 movie Split. The film casts Kevin, the character with a canon DID diagnosis, as a villain, with extreme physical changes when his alter, the Beast, switches in. The Beast is a cannibalistic monster who aims to, quote, purify the world by only leaving the broken unscathed. He is venerated by other alters in the system and is by far the most objectionable of them all, even more so than the ones who actually kidnapped the 3 girls at the start of the film. Veronika Polyakova talks about this film and others in depth in her article Beyond the Screens, including films that don't explicitly state the characters have DID, such as American Psycho and Fight Club, but are instead heavily coded as such. In every single example she lists, there is something very wrong about how the characters are portrayed. Shirley Mason, the woman behind Sybil, turned out to be a fraud. Split was plain harmful. American Psycho portrayed the main character to be a complete monster and perpetuates the violent stereotypes of DID, and Fight Club is ill-informed about how DID forms in the first place. Despite all of the bad representation out there, there is one show in particular that I want to highlight as doing an exceptional job. Marvel's 2022 show Moon Knight did particularly well at portraying DID in a positive light, even considering the dramatizations that had to be made due to its genre as a superhero show. The series flawlessly blends Egyptian mythology and Comedicism with mental health and childhood trauma to create deep, multifaceted characters that the audience can truly connect to, 2 of which share a body. Mark Spector and Stephen Grant are practically the antithesis to each other, and yet that is perhaps why they work so well together towards the end of the series. When they first meet, it is at a time of chaos and upheaval in their life, the circumstances of which we find out with Stephen in episode 5 when he and Mark sort through their memories in the duat in an effort to balance their scales. This is a plot point that I found somewhat troublesome, however, because it implies that they are 2 separate souls when that is not what DID is, but I do understand the reasoning behind this decision and think it was a good narrative device, albeit not accurate to the real-life condition. The scenes regarding their trauma were also exceptionally handled, though they were triggering for me to watch. I suppose that's a good thing, though, because they depicted it in a highly realistic way while also attempting to remain respectful. There is something to be said about the violence that Mark and Jake caused, but I didn't see it as an evil altar stereotype at all, but rather a way to show the audience how terrifying things like lost time can feel. Not only that, but Mark is a former mercenary and they were in the Marine Corps, so it makes sense that there would be action of this type. It truly doesn't come off as perpetuating harmful stereotypes in this context. Instead, it adds to the nuance behind the characters. There's honestly a lot to analyze about this show, and it could have its own separate video, so I'll leave off with this. Based on the overall quality of the show, from the perspective of someone who has DID, I think the series did an incredible job at sensitively portraying a DID system without coming off as disrespectful, and it is clear to me that the team put in all the necessary effort and then some in order to ensure it was well received. With shows such as Moon Knight and the rise of large social media platforms, it is shocking that there isn't a lot of easily accessible and accurate information that is free to the public. I feel that there is a lot of untapped potential to spread factual content about DID and other dissociative disorders without paywalling it like many medical journals tend to do. If we do a better job of spreading the truth about DID rather than fear-mongering and villainizing people with DID, then the world might be a much safer place and perhaps trauma victims would feel more comfortable coming out about their experiences, because at the heart of the matter, harmful DID stereotypes hurt more than just the DID community. They hurt everyone else too.